Yes, I don't know how I did it. I guess I was young then. That helps, that really does.
Nancy Kulp, sharp-witted, unforgettable, and best known as Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies. For decades, she was a fixture of American television, her performances beloved by audiences who laughed with her and admired her unique charm. Yet beyond the cameras, away from the sets, there was a story that fans could only guess at. One filled with questions, contradictions, and secrets she carried with her to the grave. For years, the mystery lingered, with fans and critics alike left to wonder what really happened in Nancy Kulp's life. But now, the truth has finally come out. And it's not the light-hearted ending many hoped for. It's something far more unsettling. But what dark truth was hidden behind Nancy Kulp's life? And why does the answer leave more unease than comfort? Stay with us as we reveal the chilling reality. Nancy Kulp never expected to become a household name. When she joined the Beverly Hillbillies in 1962, she thought it was just another supporting role in a career built on quirky parts and background characters. Television wasn't new to her, nor was Hollywood. She expected little more than steady work and a modest paycheck. But everything changed when she slipped on Miss Jane Hathaway's prim skirt suit, adjusted her horn-rimmed glasses, and walked into television history. As Mr. Drysdale's sharp-tongued secretary, Nancy was suddenly in American living rooms every week. What she assumed would be another credit became the defining role of her career. Audiences adored Miss Hathaway. With her clipped voice and deadpan delivery, she was the comedic foil who held the Clampett's chaos together. Women admired her independence, men laughed at her wit, and children remembered her as the stiff figure who somehow kept order. Unlike most TV women of the era, glamorous housewives or ingenues, Miss Hathaway was something else. She wasn't written to be pretty or soft. She was smart, competent, and in control. America didn't realize it then, but Nancy was showing them a version of womanhood rarely allowed to exist. Fame, however, came with a cost. The role that made her beloved also trapped her. To fans, she wasn't Nancy. She was Hathaway. Strangers addressed her by her character's name, and Hollywood executives couldn't see beyond the glasses and the bun. Her greatest triumph became a gilded cage. Yet Nancy remained different from her co-stars. She avoided parties and tabloids, gave polite but guarded interviews, and never revealed much of herself. It wasn't just shyness, it was a choice. She kept the world at arm's length, letting people know Miss Hathaway, but never Nancy Kulp. And perhaps that's exactly how she wanted it. Long before Hollywood typecast her as the eternal secretary, Nancy Kulp wore a very different uniform. During World War II, she joined the U.S. Navy Waves, women accepted for volunteer emergency service, where she worked in communications and intelligence. This was no ceremonial posting. Nancy rose to lieutenant, earned a Bronze Star, and proved she could shoulder responsibility when the world was at its most fractured. That discipline, loyalty, and quiet resilience would follow her long after the war. Instead of rushing to Hollywood, Nancy pursued knowledge. She studied journalism, earned a master's degree in English and French, and began writing press releases at MGM. At that point, she seemed destined for a steady, respectable life behind the scenes. But fate intervened. A studio executive, struck by her sharp features and distinctive presence, suggested she step in front of the camera. Nancy seized the chance. She wasn't glamorous in the conventional sense. Her tall frame, hawk-like face, and commanding voice set her apart. Yet those very qualities made her unforgettable. She landed quirky but memorable roles in Shane, Disney's The Parent Trap, and other films where her sharp timing shone. Still, Hollywood is a cruel judge. Unable to fit her into its narrow standards of beauty, it confined her to type: the spinster, the oddball, the secretary. When the Beverly Hillbillies premiered in 1962, Nancy's Miss Jane Hathaway became iconic. Loyal, witty, and endlessly proper, she stole scenes without stealing the spotlight. America loved her, but Hollywood trapped her. To the world, she was Hathaway, forever. Yet Nancy carried herself with dignity, her Navy service a reminder she'd faced real battles long before cameras rolled. But in Hollywood, success wasn't the only prize. Fame also came with whispers, and Nancy Kulp had a secret the industry was determined to uncover. For most of her career, Nancy Kulp was defined by what she wasn't. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't married. She wasn't scandalous in the way Hollywood usually defined scandal. But in her refusal to conform, she became quietly scandalous all the same. Nancy never courted attention. She skipped premieres, avoided gossip columns, and declined the glittering chaos of Hollywood nightlife. Yet that very absence made people speculate. Why wasn't she married? Why didn't she chase publicity like her peers? The less she revealed, the more the questions grew. In the 1960s and 1970s, Hollywood was merciless toward women who defied its mold. Stars were expected to be objects of desire, their personal lives carefully staged for public consumption. Nancy was different. She carried herself with independence and reserve, offering none of the stories the industry craved. Soon, the coded whispers began. She was different, private, not like the others. Everyone in Hollywood knew what those words meant, even if no one dared speak them aloud. Nancy never confirmed or denied anything. She laughed off questions, redirected interviews, or retreated into her work. To the audience, she was Miss Hathaway, prim, loyal, and asexual. To insiders, she was a puzzle, a woman who refused to play by the rules, yet somehow thrived within them. Her silence, though, was calculated. She knew how fragile reputations were. A single revelation, true or not, could end a career overnight. So she chose self-preservation, allowing the rumors to circle endlessly while she stood unmoved at the center. But silence carries its own cost. By refusing to answer, she left her life open to interpretation. Fans assumed, executives speculated, and colleagues whispered. Behind the glasses and the witty lines, Nancy Kulp carried truths the world wasn't ready to hear. In Hollywood, secrets never stay secrets for long. The industry thrives on whispers, and in Nancy Kulp's case, the whispers grew louder with every year she spent in the spotlight. On screen, she was the uptight Miss Hathaway. Off screen, the rumors about her personal life were a steady hum in studio corridors, gossip columns, and casting rooms. She wasn't married. She wasn't linked to male co-stars. She lived a life that didn't conform to Hollywood's rigid expectations. For an industry obsessed with image, that made her a target. In the coded language of the mid-20th century, Nancy was described as eccentric, independent, or different. Everyone knew what those words meant. In a time when homosexuality was taboo, when coming out could destroy a career overnight, people like Nancy had no choice but to live behind carefully constructed masks. Her career depended on silence. Still, the whispers chipped away at her reputation. Casting directors wondered if audiences would accept her in roles outside of Hathaway. Studio executives, always cautious about public perception, kept her typecast, afraid to risk scandal. Even some co-stars reportedly joked about her behind her back, turning her private life into set gossip. Nancy endured it all with quiet dignity, never letting the public see her flinch. But she couldn't completely escape the consequences. For all her talent and intelligence, Nancy was rarely given opportunities beyond the spinster roles Hollywood boxed her into. It wasn't just typecasting, it was punishment. She wasn't the bombshell producers wanted, and she wasn't the wife and mother image America demanded from its actresses. In short, Nancy didn't fit the mold. And Hollywood rarely forgives that. The secret everyone whispered about, but Nancy, never confirmed, cast a shadow over her entire career. And while she refused to let gossip define her, the truth lingered like a storm cloud waiting to break. Decades later, when she finally gave a rare interview acknowledging her truth, it shocked no one. But it revealed just how heavy the silence had been. For Nancy, the secret wasn't shame. The shame was Hollywood's, the shame of a system that forced her to live quietly, cautiously, always aware that being herself could cost her everything. For millions of viewers, The Beverly Hillbillies was pure joy. The fish-out-of-water comedy about a backwoods family striking oil and moving to Beverly Hills became one of the most beloved sitcoms of the 1960s. At the center of the madness was Miss Jane Hathaway, Nancy's defining role. She brought brains, wit, and a sharp edge to the series, balancing the Clampett's chaos with her own brand of comic discipline. But what made Nancy unforgettable on screen became her curse off-screen. Hollywood executives couldn't see beyond Hathaway. To them, Nancy wasn't an actress capable of range. She was Hathaway. And so, when the series ended in 1971 after 9 seasons, Nancy's career all but stalled. While her co-stars found ways to reinvent themselves or cash in on the nostalgia of the show, Nancy faced the darker side of typecasting. Casting directors assumed audiences wouldn't accept her as anything but Hathaway. Roles dried up. Opportunities vanished. The very success that had made her famous now left her trapped. But there was another, quieter curse. The Beverly Hillbillies family wasn't as happy off-screen as they seemed on it. Resentments festered. Contracts were disputed. And as Nancy would later discover, loyalty among co-stars had its limits. What the world thought was one big happy sitcom family was, in reality, far more fractured. For Nancy, the curse wasn't just typecasting, it was betrayal. The show that gave her fame also tethered her to a character she could never escape. And when she later sought to redefine herself, she would learn that some of her co-stars weren't just unwilling to help her, they were willing to turn against her. By the 1980s, Nancy Kulp was restless. Hollywood had all but closed its doors on her. Roles were scarce, and the typecasting curse lingered. Rather than fade quietly into obscurity, Nancy did something few actresses dared. She stepped out of Hollywood entirely and entered politics. In 1984, she launched a campaign for Congress in Pennsylvania. To her, it wasn't about image or publicity, it was about real issues. She spoke passionately about education, the environment, and serving her community. With her sharp intellect, military service, and Hollywood recognition, Nancy seemed like a formidable candidate. But politics is no gentler than Hollywood. From the start, her campaign faced challenges. Opponents painted her as inexperienced, dismissing her background as an actress. The media, always hungry for an angle, highlighted her role as Miss Hathaway more than her platform. Instead of being taken seriously, she was treated as a curiosity. And then came the personal attacks. The whispers that had once dogged her Hollywood career surfaced again, now weaponized in the political arena. Her private life, long a matter of speculation, was dragged into the open in the ugliest ways. Rivals hinted that she wasn't the traditional candidate voters wanted. In an era still deeply intolerant of difference, the coded language was obvious and devastating. Nancy fought with dignity, refusing to be rattled, but the damage was done. What might have been a bold reinvention became a harsh reminder that the same forces that marginalized her in Hollywood were just as cruel in politics. And then came the blow that truly broke her: betrayal from someone she once considered family. In the rough-and-tumble world of politics, every endorsement matters. Nancy Kulp knew that if she could rally support from well-known figures, she might stand a fighting chance against her opponent. And who better than her old Beverly Hillbillies family? For 9 years, America had seen them together on screen, laughing and scheming as one big quirky clan. Surely they would stand by her. But Nancy miscalculated. Instead of unity, she encountered betrayal that cut deeper than any Hollywood slight. Buddy Ebsen, her on-screen boss, Jed Clampett, publicly turned against her. He not only refused to endorse her campaign, he actively campaigned for her opponent. The betrayal was shocking. To audiences, Nancy and Buddy had shared an easy chemistry on screen. But behind the curtain, their relationship was complicated. Ebsen leaned conservative. Nancy leaned liberal. Their ideological differences, once just private disagreements, now became a battlefield. And Ebsen, wielding his star power and public platform, used it to undermine her. For Nancy, it wasn't just about politics. It was personal. After all those years working together, after building a show that defined an era, she expected at least neutrality. Instead, she got sabotage. Newspapers gleefully reported on the rift, painting it as proof that even her Hollywood family didn't believe in her. The damage was severe. Voters who might have been swayed by Nancy's fame now saw division. Worse, her opponent capitalized on it, pointing to Ebsen's betrayal as a sign that Nancy was unfit for the role. The campaign was already uphill. Now it became impossible. Nancy lost the election by a wide margin, and though she carried herself with grace in defeat, the wound lingered. It wasn't just the loss of a seat in Congress. It was the loss of faith in someone she had once trusted. Hollywood had boxed her in, politics had chewed her up, and now even her sitcom Family had turned on her. For the rest of her life, the memory of that betrayal haunted her. In interviews, she rarely spoke about Ebsen, but those who knew her said the pain was never far from the surface. In Hollywood, enemies were expected. In politics, opponents were inevitable. But betrayal from someone you once thought of as family, that was something Nancy could never quite forgive. After her failed political bid, Nancy tried to return to Hollywood, but it wasn't the same. The industry she had once fought to conquer had moved on without her. Casting directors, already reluctant to see her as anything beyond Hathaway, now considered her politically divisive. The roles that trickled in were few and far between. Nancy made occasional guest appearances on television, sometimes reprising Hathaway for nostalgic specials, but the parts were small, the paychecks modest, and the respect minimal. For an actress of her caliber, it was humiliating. She had once been a household name, and now she was little more than a trivia answer, a relic of a bygone era of television. Worse, she often felt isolated from her old colleagues. The sting of Buddy Ebsen's betrayal still loomed, and while she remained cordial with some of her other castmates, the closeness they once shared was gone. Hollywood had always been a lonely place, but now, in her later years, the loneliness deepened. In interviews, Nancy would put on a brave face, recalling her days on the Beverly Hillbillies with humor and warmth. But privately, friends said she felt sidelined, forgotten, and betrayed by the very system she had devoted her life to. Fame had given her everything, and then stripped it away. Her final years in Hollywood were marked by a kind of tragic dignity. She wasn't bitter, at least not outwardly. But the sparkle of ambition, the hunger to prove herself, was dimmed. She had fought for roles, fought for respect, fought for reinvention. And each time, she had been met with resistance, dismissal, or outright sabotage. It was the cruelest irony. The very talent that had once carried her so far was now overshadowed by the ghosts of her past. And Nancy, who had always longed to be seen as more than Miss Hathaway, would spend the rest of her days knowing that Hollywood never let her escape that shadow. By the 1990s, Nancy Kulp had stepped out of the spotlight almost entirely. She retreated from Hollywood, living quietly and focusing on her health. But the battle she faced now wasn't with studios, or politics, or gossip columns. It was with her own body. In 1990, Nancy was diagnosed with cancer. The news devastated those who had followed her career, though few knew the full extent of her struggle. She underwent treatment, but the disease progressed. By 1991, it was clear she didn't have much time left. It was during these final months that Nancy seemed to shed the last of her masks. For years, she had lived in silence about her private life. But in a rare interview, she finally confirmed what so many had whispered about her for decades. She was gay. It wasn't a grand announcement, just a quiet acknowledgement, almost casual in its delivery. But it carried weight. For Nancy, it was a final act of honesty. She had lived through an era when being open could end a career. She had endured typecasting, gossip, and betrayal, all while hiding a truth that was central to who she was. In her final days, she refused to hide anymore. Those who knew her best said it was liberating. She may not have been able to live her entire life openly, but she could at least leave the world with the truth. And in that truth, she found a measure of peace. Nancy Kulp passed away on February 3, 1991, at the age of 69. Her death was mourned by fans, but the true depth of her story, the betrayals, the heartbreaks, the courage, was only fully understood years later. She had been more than Miss Hathaway, more than a sitcom actress. She had been a woman who fought for her place in a world that never fully embraced her, and who, in the end, had the courage to live her truth. When Nancy Kulp died in 1991, the headlines were polite but perfunctory. Most simply called her Miss Hathaway, the loyal secretary from the Beverly Hillbillies. Few mentioned her bruising political battle. Even fewer acknowledged the quiet courage of her late-life revelation. Hollywood, ever eager to reduce a complex life to a neat obituary, tried to tuck her away as a nostalgic footnote. But Nancy's story refused to stay buried. Over time, a new generation of fans and historians began to look beyond the sitcom laughs and the typecast image. They uncovered the fierce intelligence that made her more than a character actor, the ambition that drove her into politics, and the private battles she fought in an unforgiving industry. What emerged was not a caricature, but a portrait of a woman decades ahead of her time. In a business that prized conformity, Nancy dared to be different. She was openly witty in an era when women were expected to be demure. She ran for office when actresses were supposed to fade gracefully into retirement. And though she kept her sexuality private for most of her career, her quiet confirmation near the end of her life gave strength to others who longed for representation. She lived a life of quiet rebellion, never loud enough to topple the system, but strong enough to leave cracks in its facade. Her political defeat, once dismissed as a failure, now reads like a badge of honor. She entered the brutal arena of American politics not for fame. She already had that, but to make a difference. In an age when few in Hollywood dared to take a stand, she risked her career for her convictions. That bravery resonates even more today, when the intersection of celebrity and politics is often treated as spectacle rather than sacrifice. Even her professional frustrations, the endless typecasting and the betrayals by colleagues, underscore a truth about Hollywood that remains relevant. Talent alone is never enough. Nancy Kulp had the skill, the presence, and the drive, but the machinery of fame demanded submission to an image she never fully embraced. Her resistance cost her roles, but it also gave her a legacy that outlasted the fickle whims of casting directors. Today, fans who revisit the Beverly Hillbillies often see Miss Hathaway differently. They recognize the sharp comedic timing, the subtle authority, the quiet dignity Nancy infused into every scene. They sense the woman behind the character, a performer who refused to be defined by the limitations imposed upon her. In the laughter, there is also defiance. Nancy Kulp's legacy is not the simple nostalgia Hollywood tried to sell. It is the story of a woman who lived on her own terms, even when the world demanded compromise. She was a pioneer who fought battles both public and private, winning some, losing others, but never surrendering her identity. Her life reminds us that the measure of success isn't fame or fortune, but the courage to remain true to oneself. In the end, Nancy Kulp was more than a sitcom secretary, more than a political footnote, more than a Hollywood curiosity. She was a trailblazer whose quiet strength continues to echo, a reminder that even in an industry built on illusion, truth has a way of enduring. If a life seems defined by laughter on screen, should we accept the smiles, or question what shadows hid just out of sight? The mystery of Nancy Kulp has finally been solved, but the truth is far from comforting. Before time buries the unease, remember, some revelations refuse to fade quietly. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.